Every single day, you and I face this kind of quiet, underlying dilemma. It's the constant tension between chasing material gain and holding on to human connection. Now, our small daily choices kind of fade over time, right? But the massive ones, especially the ones where there's a huge practical advantage on the line, those can literally define our lives. So, what actually happens when a major win comes at the direct expense of a relationship? Let's unpack this. Imagine this. You're standing at a major crossroads. In one hand, you've got this massive practical advantage. We're talking a huge financial windfall, maybe a career-making promotion, or just a massive bump in your social status. But, in the other hand, securing that advantage means you are going to deeply damage a relationship with a really valued friend, a family member, or a colleague. Human nature kind of pushes us to desperately grasp at that material value, right? Sometimes we're willing to sacrifice almost anything to get it. But is that really the right move? Well, sacrificing a relationship for a temporary win is usually a critical misstep. Think about the logic here for a second. If you prioritize a relationship and maybe lose out on some profit in the moment, that material gain is usually just, temporarily gone. You can almost always recover it later. But human connections, they are fundamentally different. If you choose the practical advantage at a pivotal moment, you lose that relationship. And lost relationships are rarely, if ever, easily found again. Plus, there's this ironic twist. People who sacrifice people for profit, they often end up losing that profit eventually anyway. Let's look at the anchor narrative for this idea, the story of Abraham and Lot. To really hammer this philosophy home, let's look at this classic historical case study. So Abraham and Lot, they traveled together from Ur to Canaan, and they rocked up massive success along the way. I mean, they were essentially the ancient world's equivalent of billionaires with just absolute massive amounts of livestock and wealth. But here's the crazy part. This success ironically forced a major crisis point. The land literally just couldn't support all their combined possessions. So you start getting these bitter, escalating clashes between Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. The tension was just rising, the environment was totally strained, and a choice had to be made before these family ties were completely destroyed. And Abraham's response here is just incredible. He steps up and says, "Let there be no strife between you and me, for we are kinsmen." Now, keep in mind, as the elder and the uncle, Abraham had absolutely every right and the cultural backing of the time to just pick the best land for himself. But he explicitly brings up their relationship as the reason to avoid this conflict over peripheral material stuff. He completely yields his priority. He actually offers his nephew the very first pick of the land, totally valuing peace and their bond over his own potential material gain. Now, a wise and decent person who actually respected that relationship would have deferred right back to his uncle, right? He'd ask the elder to choose first, but instead, Lot looks around, sees the incredibly well-watered, fertile plain of the Jordan, which historically looked basically like the garden of the Lord, and he just immediately claims it without a second thought. So you have Abraham yielding his priority to keep the peace, and Lot doing the exact opposite. He completely prioritized immediate, highly visible material profit over the relational decency he actually owed his family. But there was a massive hidden cost to Lot's decision. That gorgeous, fertile land he so eagerly grabbed, it directly bordered Sodom and Gomorrah, cities that were destined for absolute destruction. Lot's choice was driven entirely by what looked good and what was materially profitable right in that moment, and it ultimately led him straight toward unforeseen ruin. The immediate gain just completely blinded him to the long-term disaster. And this brings us to some broader historical precedents of profit. Because you see, this isn't just an isolated incident, it's a recurring human pattern. Take Adam and Eve. It wasn't really just about wanting a piece of fruit. They were tempted by this idea of becoming their own masters, of gaining the wisdom to know good and evil. They chose that perceived practical advantage over their foundational relationship with their Creator, and the result was obviously a devastating loss. Or look at Judas. He originally followed his teacher, totally expecting a political messiah, someone to lead a revolution for national independence from Rome. And when those very specific political and material goals weren't met, he discarded the relationship and sold out his teacher for immediate profit. In both of these famous cases, the practical goal completely overshadowed the relational bond. Which brings us to a really fascinating psychological takeaway, this concept of inner impoverishment. It's that dry internal emptiness that absolutely cannot be filled by material wealth. It can only be filled by genuine connection.
Today, we live in a society with kind of inverted values, where people just easily discard relationships for profit. We're always chasing the next promotion or the next big payout, even if it hurts our family or friends. But listen, no amount of profit is ever going to cure that inner dryness. People wander around trying to fill their empty hearts with stuff, but a void created by a lack of relationship, that can literally only be filled by a relationship.
So, how do we fix this? Let's talk about cultivating true connections. Having looked at all those historical warnings and the psychological costs, we basically arrive at this ultimate resolution. Humans are fundamentally relational beings. The very definition of what makes you a person is tied to connection. You honestly cannot truly be human without it. And we aren't just talking about having a couple of friends. True humanity requires right relationships completely across the board. A right relationship with the divine, with yourself, with your neighbors, and with the created world around you. At the end of the day, we are not built for profit. We are built for connection. There's this fantastic quote from Thomas A. Langford that sums it up perfectly. He says, "If the relationship develops positively, there are times of shared joy and delight and times of shared pain and worry." True wealth isn't sitting in a bank account and it's not a piece of fertile land. It's actually found in the shared emotional experiences of cultivated relationships. Like any living thing, relationships have to grow. They feed on sincere love, trust, respect, and care. Choosing connection means really embracing life in all its complexity. You're opening yourself up to both the profound joys and, the inevitable worries. So I want to leave you with a question to really think about. What can a person actually trade for a relationship? If you gain the entire world but lose your vital connections, what have you truly gained? In a society that is just constantly pushing us to choose that immediate, visible profit, take a second to pause and look at your own daily priorities. Consider the immense, totally replaceable value of the people around you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today, and I really hope it sparks some great thoughts for the choices you make moving forward.